Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
You are welcome along to Wednesday Night Rugby. Loads to discuss. Very happy to say Gerry Thornley of the Irish Times is with us. Hey, Gerry.
Good, thanks, Joe. Yourself?
Very well. And Fiona Hayes, former Irish international, also on the line. Fiona, hello.
Hello, Joe. How are you getting on? Thanks for having me back.
Very well. No, listen, it's great to have you back. So the United Rugby Championship, after 5 rounds, takes a pause, draws breath. This is the new rhythm of the season that we're all getting used to. So it will be November, last weekend in November before it returns. Results from week 5: Glasgow 15, Leinster 31 on Friday night. Saturday, Connacht 36, Ulster 11 at the Aviva Stadium, and then later that evening, Ospreys 18, Munster 10. We'll get on to all of that. Gerry, first of all, November internationals up and running in the sense that the Irish team gathered in Carton House yesterday, and Johnny Sexton had a press conference, and the ball is rolling on November.
Yeah, it sure is. It's come around. It feels almost like much earlier in the season. That the provinces have barely got a few games under their belt. A few of the Lions have hardly played any rugby at all. It's, when you think about it, I did an average of the 38-man squad when the squad was picked. The numbers might have gone up slightly last weekend. They'd averaged 2.5 games between them this season, and that's in the equivalent of Celtic League, Magnus League, Pro 12, Pro 14, whatever you want to call it, now the URC. No European matches for the first time ever going into November window per se, and it's a seriously undercooked squad against particularly battle-hardened All Blacks, who are probably going to win with some ease against the Welsh side that's looks a bit like lambs to the slaughter this weekend. So and then a very dangerous Japanese side coming straight up. It's a little bit of a concern that this Irish squad isn't nearly as well primed as previous sides have been going into November windows.
Do you think, by the way, as an aside, the provinces will need smaller squads given the format of the United Rugby Championship now?
Yeah, I think it's a real problem. And I've flagged this before the season started. It's a particular problem for somebody like Leo Cullen and the Leinster Brains Trust, and maybe even Munster and Ulster to a lesser degree, Connacht as well, keeping big squads content. It's one of Leo Cullen's particularly successful juggling acts that he has kept such a big squad content and happy because they've been playing plenty of rugby matches. If you look at it, they've only 22 guaranteed games this season, whereas previous times it would have been 28. Now that can rise if they get a few knockout games, as no doubt Leinster will. But yeah, I think it's going to be a real problem keeping everybody happy. Rugby players don't train just for the sake of it. They train to play rugby matches. They don't train to sit with their feet up in front of the TV on a Saturday afternoon. And that's going to happen to quite a lot of them, apart from the 18 guys who are bulk suppliers to the Irish team. The rest of them now, unless they get a couple of A games or a bit of AIL action, there's not going to be much rugby for them, and I think that is problematic. You look at players like Ross Byrne, who's always averaging over 20 games a season for Leinster, through no fault of his own. That might not happen this season. And like Jack Carty, not feeling the love from Andy Farrell and the Irish coaches, they're both out of contract at the end of the season. So I do think it's going to raise severe difficulties for the provinces potentially.
Because the next 3-4 weeks, Fiona, if you could stomach, I suppose, in a sense, kicking your heels for the last 5 matches, then this would have been your period, the next 4 or 5 weeks to get some game time. Or equally, in advance of a European match, you might have got to run out the week before. That's all disappeared. And, Gerry's talking about some of the frontline players being a touch undercooked. When there are only 5 United Rugby Championship matches in advance of November, you can see how the bigger boys have to get some game time. So you can see that number of, 50, 60 squad members coming down a touch.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not needed. We're looking at the games now, Munster in particular. I think there's been a good bit of rotation, and you wonder, when the guys go in to play these November internationals, will they be feeling it that they haven't played enough rugby? Some of the borderline players, obviously you had your lines away, but it's massively being rotated at times, and there just doesn't seem to be enough rugby to be played by everyone, and especially if they're not being released to AIL, which the top guys wouldn't be.
So Johnny Sexton was out talking to the press, Gerry, and he had an interesting point, I suppose. It's 2 years tomorrow, 28th of October 2023, that the World Cup gets underway. And Johnny Sexton said, we've spoken about that. We've spoken about the World Cup, that we have a 2-year block ahead of us. We have sort of put it on the radar, which was never done before, certainly since I've been involved. Thought that was very interesting. One, that it's never been done before, I find noteworthy, and I'm not sure if that was the right way to approach a World Cup. Maybe that explains a certain anxiety that comes around then when it suddenly blows up in your face. But secondly, that Andy Farrell has decided to change it. So thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I was interested in those comments, all right. I don't believe this is necessarily so, loath as I am to disagree with Johnny Sexton. Like, Joe Schmidt took a squad to Japan 2 years out from the last World Cup. You telling me he wasn't planning for the World Cup when he did that? I'm sure the coaches were planning well in advance of the World Cup. They mightn't have made as big a deal of it in front of the players, and it didn't distract them from having a stupendous 2018, winning the Grand Slam and getting to number 2 in the world and winning World Team of the Year and beating the All Blacks. But I'm sure there's plenty of planning in advance in previous campaigns as well. I'm also not sure that Irish rugby shouldn't be entirely viewed in the prism of a World Cup. I've heard Ger Gilroy debating this on your fine news talk station recently enough. And should it always be judged on the prism of a World Cup, given that, you know, it can't devalue what happens in between if Ireland win Grand Slams or, you know, beat the All Blacks twice. That maybe came back to haunt them because they poked the bear not once but twice the last World Cup cycle. But it still made a lot of the intervening 4 years, you know, there were great highs in there. And I don't think that it should be just discoloured by one decidedly anticlimactic World Cup when admittedly Ireland were beaten not only by Japan but then beaten at the gate by New Zealand in the quarterfinals. So, and also bearing in mind what the draw is for the next World Cup, you couldn't have handpicked a worse draw for Ireland than the next World Cup. The holders South Africa and Scotland, a dangerous Scotland side in the pool stages. And then if Ireland get out of the pool stages, almost certainly they face the 4 yearly favourites in the All Blacks. They'll be already hot favourites. I think they're less than 2-1 to win the World Cup. Or the second favourites in co-host France. So you just could not have designed a tougher draw than that. So I still think that Ireland needs to put its best foot forward in this November window against Japan and the All Blacks, because you're seeing with the football team, when results are good, interest comes back, it swells gates. You know, Ireland have to keep on performing as well. So I think this squad has probably got an eye on the World Cup when you think of 9 players with 3 caps or less. There's a fair sprinkle of youth, another couple of uncapped players in it. I'm not sure what people want. I think Andy Farrell has blooded well over 20 players in just 17 matches in charge. And younger players are being looked at, notably in the summer. And this is with reduced opportunity, given that there was no tour to Australia, there was no tour to Fiji. I'd say a large chunk of this side, even Hugo Keenan's got 13 caps, has never played a Southern Hemisphere side before. Has never played South Africa, Australia or New Zealand, and we're 2 years out from the World Cup. So the scope for real experimentation is reduced when you've got the November window coming up, the Six Nations itself, and then a 3-test tour to New Zealand. Because if Ireland start shipping 50-point beatings against the All Blacks, you're going to see that affect gate receipts and turnouts at the Aviva Stadium as well. It's all interlinked. So there is reduced scope in this World Cup window. Admittedly, in this, Andy Farrell is not alone, and a lot of the other head coaches are in similar positions.
Yeah, Fiona, I wouldn't think Andy Farrell is in a strong enough position to get too hung up on the World Cup. I mean, pre the England game in the Six Nations, he was under big pressure. So I would think there will be, as Gerry says, short-termism. Let's win games, let's build momentum. And okay, they may have had a conversation about it in Carton House, but I'd be surprised, I don't know what your read on this is, I'd be surprised if this conversation was all that dramatically different to anything which has gone before. I know Johnny Sexton has said it was never talked about before, but I guess you take that kernel and media blow it up and it sounds like it's some massive big shift. I'd be surprised if it is, really.
Yeah, it's actually. I was talking to Bernard Jackman was talking this morning about how when they were reviewed the last World Cup, that actually Joe Schmidt said that he started talking about the World Cup a year out. It was 1 year out, and that was one of his big regrets with the team, that he focused too close to time. So it's actually interesting how different coaches approach different ways and how they're looking at the team. But I definitely think it was mentioned as well, because you're looking at the youth that Andy Farrell is bringing in, and he's trying to get these guys game time. So I suppose it's making the public aware that there are going to be changes. There's 3 games here. Some of the youth are going to get a go, but we obviously have to win these games as well. Very, very important in the rankings.
Yeah, I mean, the chat could have amounted to, lads, 2 years to the World Cup. Let's get focused. It starts with Japan.
Good point, Fiona. Do you remember the England game, first game at that Six Nations? He tried Robbie Henshaw at fullback. I don't think he'd do that again.
No, that's it. That's it. Like, and to be fair, it is important. We're looking at it, and you know, we all know that it's 3 big games. People thought maybe Japan, but it's not. You don't know what Argentinian team is going to show up as well on the day. So nobody wants losses under their belt, you know, now. And you know, Six Nations isn't a time to experiment. So it is going to be interesting what he's going to do in these games, especially the Japan game, I think.
Because you almost use that Japan game as a dry run for the All Blacks, don't you? You can't make 13 changes going in to face the All Blacks when they're the most battle-hard team in the world at the moment.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sorry, Gerry, jumped in you there. Worth mentioning, Johnny Sexton, if he does play against Japan, will win cap test match appearance number 100 for Ireland. Debut at 24 in 2009. Never in a million years would I have imagined I'd get to 100, because when you get your first cap, you think, well, if I get 6 or 7, 8 years at the top, I'll be happy. And like 24-year-old Johnny Sexton thinking to himself, if I get 6 or 7 or 8 years at the top, I'll be happy. That was a fairly realistic aim, I would think. He's just surprised himself and everybody else. So he's made 100.
It's a phenomenal achievement. Is he only the 7th Irish player to do so, something like that?
You had it in your piece. So Driscoll is 133, O'Gara is 128, Rory Best 124, Cian Healy 109, O'Connell 108 and Hayes 105. And now Johnny Sexton joins the list. So still a very exclusive one.
Very exclusive club, all the more so when you think that he didn't make his debut until he was 24 against Fiji in the RDS, wasn't it? When that ageless Keith Earls also scored 2 tries that night as well. And he's already comfortably Ireland's second highest point scorer. Like, he's almost 400 clear of David Humphries, only Ronan O'Gara, admittedly, fair bit ahead of him still. But yeah, he's been a phenomenal player for Ireland. When you think also of his CV and what he's achieved in his time as the Irish number 10, there's, the wins over the All Blacks, there's a Grand Slam, there was 3 Six Nations titles in total, come from behind series win in Australia. I mean, it's been quite a CV of achievements in an Irish shirt. Of course, the one thing that bugs him probably most of all is not getting past the quarterfinals of the World Cup. He was not picked to start one, he was injured for another one, and then he lost the last one. So he's got every motivation in the world to try and keep going until the next one.
Just a point, I hadn't even thought to discuss it really. I was just flicking around looking at various pieces, and I saw Johnny Waterson in the Irish Times was talking about the cost of tickets for the upcoming games. So take the All Blacks, which is the most expensive one. Obviously, the Japan and Argentina matches are cheaper, but All Blacks game now, Fiona, the cost of an upper stand ticket for the match is €125. Category 2, 3 and 4 tickets are 115, 110 and 105. Now look, I'm sure market forces apply and there's supply and demand here, and they have tested one way or another what people are willing to pay, and people are willing to pay this. These tickets will be snapped up. You do kind of wonder, when is enough? When is it just too much to be charging this these kind of figures for matches? I don't know. Do you don't get any free as a former Grand Slam winner, do you?
Not a chance. That's the best line of the day. Not a hope. I wish. I try and climb the walls, but I can't get over. No. Look, I suppose we have to look at that day, or if you haven't had many games, selling tickets wise in the last few years. So you would just hope that maybe that the ticket cost is so high is that they're trying to make a bit of money back. But yeah, I went online actually looking at them today, and I thought the prices were absolutely crazy. There was still a few available, but it is what it is. I suppose when there is a demand there, it's people haven't seen live rugby. It's the All Blacks. It's the best team in the world. They're a joy to watch. We're all looking at our screens, watching them on telly. They're like, even myself, I played. I watch the rugby Aotearoa. I just think the rugby style is amazing, and I've never seen it I saw it actually in the Aviva once, but other than that, I think the Irish people absolutely love the southern style over there, how they play.
Well, the prices are pretty much in line with where we were in 2018, and there was huge hype obviously around that match for obvious reasons. I think they were even slightly more expensive. They were at €137 as opposed to 125 for these upper stand tickets. Gerry Thornley is shifting uncomfortably, everyone, because he swans in for free. He flashes that badge. He says, "I'm of the Irish Times, thank you very much," and show me to my seat. And so it's just, I mean, Gerry, I don't know. It's one of those things. I mean, it's not like, I'm not outraged here or anything, but it's just noteworthy that I'm sure lots of families who adore their rugby are priced out of these games now, and that unfortunately is the reality of the world.
Yeah, it has slightly uncanny echoes of that time they first returned to the old Lansdowne Road, what was then the new Aviva. Do you remember after their stint in Croke Park when the ground was redeveloped? I seem to remember 4 matches in the November window, also including the All Blacks and Argentina. I think they overpriced the tickets then. They got that one wrong. It wasn't one of the most glorious chapters in the IRFU's history. They'd admitted as much afterwards. And I think the All Blacks game was the only sellout of the 4. And I wouldn't be surprised if something similar happens with these 3 games as well, because of the pricing of the tickets, and B, there still might be a little bit of nervousness out there about going to capacity grounds amongst the general public. And also the Japan game is 1 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon, which isn't a great time for a match. And the Argentina game is on lunchtime on a Sunday, which is a particularly difficult time to sell a match. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But, it mightn't be a surprise if we don't see every seat occupied for the first and third games at least.
Well, that's all ahead of us. Let's have a backward glance at the weekend just gone. As I mentioned, Glasgow 15, Leinster 31. On Saturday then at the Aviva Stadium, Connacht 36, Ulster 11, and later that evening, Ospreys 18, Munster 10. So Connacht 36, Ulster 11 at the Aviva. There was a degree here, Fiona, for Connacht, because of that defeat to the Dragons and because of the way the cookie crumbled against Munster, coulda, shoulda, woulda. They really were backs against the wall territory here if they want to have any hope of making European qualification, for instance, and that's going to be difficult regardless. But there was a real, probably, desperation on Connacht's part to win this game from the point of view of European qualification, and also when you're potentially dragging a few diehards all the way up from Galway.
Yeah, they weren't happy about that trip up to the Aviva, I don't think some, but look, it paid off for them. I think the pitch actually suited their style of rugby, and to be honest with you, it was a must-win game for them. As you said, they really, they'd had their couple of losses and they were way off the pace, Ulster, Munster, and I think they were maybe, even with this winner, are they 9 points adrift of Ulster even still? So I know there's a bit of a gap there, and they showed it. They had to perform. Andy Friend got them up and running, but a lot of people, online talked about their attack, their phase playoff scrum, everything. But I was just immensely impressed with their defence. I thought their defence, their want, their counter ruck, everything they'd done around that area was absolutely brilliant on the day for me. Yeah,
because it's easy to get very taken with their style of play and talk about the attacking flair and the offloads and the running, and the basis that you mentioned is always going to be crucial for Connacht.
Yeah, and I mean that's it. I mean, Andy Friend has brought this game to them that's really attractive to watch. Every week you talk to people about the games at the weekend. It's in general Connacht they're talking about. The style, it's really good. All options on. As I said, their phase playoff scrums is brilliant to watch. Their catch pass under pressure, they seem to have it nailed down to a T. When they're good, they're really good. But I think Cully Tucker had the defence up and running. We saw it a bit in the Munster game, and we definitely saw it up in the Aviva. I mean, from the kick-off, I think, Tom Daly was attacking that ruck. Nathan Doak didn't have a second, and that set the tone. And he literally was under pressure, I think, at ruck time a lot. And not only that, their line speed, their communication, Jack Carty marching him around the pitch in defence as well was really good to watch.
Dan McFarland, interesting afterwards, Gerry. I suspect you were in this press conference. He was asked what he learned from the defeat. What do I learn? Do you know one thing I know about us? We're not good when we're favourites. I find that so frustrating. We'll pull monster performances out when we're playing teams that on paper are much better than us. Now, I want to make it clear I'm not being respectful to Connacht there, but we were the favourites tonight from the bookies' point of view. I don't think we play as well when we do that. So, 2 things for you. One, that's a really stiff critique of your players. That's really saying your attitude is off. That's the antithesis of being a professional. And so he's really probably giving them something to think about on their time off, which is interesting. Secondly, we always have to take what coaches say with a pinch of salt. I would put it to you, and I've watched a lot of Ulster this season because I don't do much on Friday nights, increasingly. I'm very boring lifestyle. Glasgow, Zebre, Benetton at home, the Lions at home. I would say flatter to deceive, if we're being brutally honest about Ulster, with the caveat that there were certain performances in there like Doak, which caught the eye. But, they were scrambling here for bonus point wins against limited enough opposition. So I didn't actually... I really thought Connacht would put it up to Ulster in this game because of that. So give us your overarching thoughts on the McFarland comments and Ulster coming into this game.
Well, actually, yeah, it was the first time we attended a press conference in person since, March 2019. And I'm not patting myself on the back, it was at the end of a long press conference that I actually asked Dan that one question. You won 4 matches, now you've lost 1. I always remember Declan Kidney always saying you learn more from your defeats than your wins. So I said, you think you've learned more from this than you did from your wins? And that's when he launched into this very long answer that his frustrations just poured out, and he was really frustrated that his team were favourites and couldn't cope with that. I do think you've touched on something that's very valid, Joe, that the opening 4 rounds of fixtures were very friendly for them. They were expected to win all four. They were a little bit lucky to beat Glasgow in the opening game, and certainly the latter three. 3 of the first 4 at home, and your one away game is Zebra, who are bottom of the table. So it was a very favourable opening clutch of 4 matches. And then they come down to Aviva to come up against, as Fiona said, a very fired up Connacht side who are in desperation mode, that just have to win, but are also playing very good rugby. And perhaps are a little bit more match hardened from having played an Interpro derby the week before against Thomond Park and all that an Interpro derby entails. Because to be quite honest, it's still a step up in anything else I've seen throughout the course of the United Rugby Championship, brave new dawn that it is. The Interpros are still another level up, and I'd say Andy Farrell would have liked a few more of them in the first 5 rounds to prime his players for what's coming up for November in the absence of the European matches. And Connacht played very well, and he wasn't being in any way disrespectful. How could he? He was there for guts of 2 decades himself as a former player and as assistant coach. But I think it would be a little bit of a wake-up call for them. I was surprised by how much the line speed of Connacht in defence, and Fiona's dead right. I think Colin Tucker's really upped that level of their game this season. It's a new defence. It's much more aggressive. The line speed might cost them 1 or 2 penalties, but it plays in their opposition faces. And it was very fitting that they got 2 of their 5 tries effectively from their defence. And it just rattled Ulster. Nathan Doak actually had to be warned via the referee that he'd heard enough of him, didn't want to hear any more of him. So he did get a Stuart McCluskey normally makes a much bigger impression on the game than he did. The Connacht midfield were excellent defensively. Tom Daly actually made light of Bundy's absence, so you can't give him much more praise than that. And then, so I think it's a good wake-up call for Ulster. The problem for them, of course, is now they've got to stew in it for 5 weeks. But, Stephen Ferris, for one, was not that surprised. He had seen the flaws. I thought it was impressive enough they won the first 4, Joe, given they didn't have any Marcel Koitsa-type figure, no talisman. They didn't have John Cooney. They didn't have Stuart McCluskey. And they didn't have Jacob Stockdale. Possibly their 4 most important players when the going has been good for them in the last few years. And they still came through with 4 bonus point wins. But, Connacht were just a big step up on the 4 teams they played before. And the other thing I'd really like to say about Connacht is, you're right, Fiona, about the phase play. I think that first try was a counter-attack off John Porch fielding a kick. And they go through 9 phases. And in the 9th phase, their shape is still as good as it would be in a first phase attack. And Cardi goes out the back to Arnold, and it looks as if he's going to go out the back again because there's so much good animation off the ball. And instead it pops a short little flat pass to Paul Boyle, who goes through 2 tackles with his hands. And it's a fantastic finish from Niall Murray. But the other thing that's really impressed me about them, even in their defeats this season against Munster, even against the Dragons, is their launch plays are as good, if not better, certainly than Munster's, and probably better than Ulster's, and possibly even better than Leinster's. Their launch plays, the variety of them. You see Jack Carty's little back flick. You see Dave Heffernan peeling around a line out and hitting a small little scrum half on an out-end line. It's this animation going on up there, and they're making inroads off their launch plays. And I believe that a lot of that is down to Mossy Lawler, with Peter Wilkins then putting it all together, and Andy, your friend, assuming a much more of a director of rugby role. So I think it's good for the competition, if not good for Ulster. Maybe it'll even be good for Ulster in the long run that Connacht did record a bonus point win and keep that Irish shield a little bit competitive rather than the other 3 vanishing over the horizon.
Fiona, what do you think it is in Jack Carty that Andy Farrell isn't quite sure of or doesn't fancy? Because obviously it's another good game and another very good performance from his point of view.
Yeah, and I had read comments in the previous week that kind of gave me a bit of that I was thinking that maybe he was in Farrell's mind because because Jack obviously spoke about him contacting Andy Farrell and what he need to work on, and for me, one of the things I would have thought he had to work on was his leadership qualities, his control of the game. We know what he can do kicking wise. We can know what he can do when he's on the gain line attack, and I think he's really, really upped it. So I'm baffled by it. The only thing I could think of is that he's looking to the future. I mean, you have Harry Byrne in there. I mean, I don't understand it because both bar Johnny, I don't think either of the two other lads have proved themselves at that level yet. Obviously Joey has at times, but I mean right now, form wise, we haven't seen it from Joey. And Harry, we all know he has it, but we haven't got the chance to see it. We know he likes to play a deeper game than Ross, and that might suit the way Farrell wants to play. But I would imagine we've never gotten over the Japan mistake. I suppose what happened in Japan, and it seems like it stayed with him. Maybe he doesn't train when he's up at camp as good as he is playing. I have no idea. I don't understand it.
Gerry, of the 2 lads in there, Carberry and Harry Byrne, this November, what game time will they see? Like, is Sexton going to start against Japan? Certainly New Zealand, you would say. But of the other games, will Harry Burns start a game? Will Joey Carbery start a game?
It's a good question. I would imagine Johnny Sexton, if it will start against Japan, because like we were saying earlier, this Japan game is a dry run now for the All Blacks game, for a very undercooked squad. We call them fairly lightly toasted. So they do need this game, a lot of them. And I think it will be quite a full-on frontline team to play Japan. Out of respect for Japan as well, by the way, because for all they did beat Ireland in the World Cup, and they ran Australia very close there recently, and they're a very dangerous side and a thrilling side to watch, probably outside of the All Blacks, the most entertaining side to watch in the world at the moment. So they'll be good to watch, and they'll be a real test. So Johnny Sexton will start those two games. I'd imagine Joey Carbery will be on the bench for both those two games, and then it'd be a question to wait and see for the Argentina. I think what experimentation there's going to be is most likely going to be for the last game against the Pumas, when maybe Joey will start with Harry on the bench and Johnny Sexton will be given a rest for that one. I don't know.
By the way, just to put a final point on the Connacht discussion, Gary Doyle summed it up very well, I thought, in the 42, where he was saying of Connacht after this win, he said all of a sudden the playoff chances, or places rather, don't seem so far away, although they must be looking at the table and Edinburgh and Glasgow's positions and wondering, how is this structure fair? He says, as a reminder, those two Scottish sides, they get to play Benetton and Zebre twice, Connacht just the once, whereas Connacht will have to play the league's three top sides in Leinster, Munster and Ulster twice, whereas Glasgow and Edinburgh have only one game against the Irish provinces. There is a real unfairness baked in here, Gerry, whether we like it or not, from a Connacht point of view, certainly.
From the outset, from the moment this format was announced, the fixture list was announced, if you conspire to disadvantage one team, it was probably Connacht. Look at the top three at the table. It's got that old familiar look to it now, with Leinster atop, Munster second, Ulster third, and they've got to play them 6 times, whereas the Italians and Scots get to play their round of 6 matches, and they're also ring-fenced one guaranteed spot, not that they probably need it, in next season's Heineken Champions Cup. So it could not have been more disadvantageous to one team other than Connacht. And it's worth noting as well that the Irish provinces voted against this format. They wanted a merit-based only top 8 to qualify. The Scots and the Welsh and the Italians all voted in favour of this format because it gives them a leg up and revives interest in them and increases their chances of having more participation in the Heineken Champions Cup. And it will only be in for 2 years, because then it would need a unanimous decision, and the Irish provinces are going to be no more inclined to vote for it then than they were now. But the problem, of course, is they can't have to live with it for 2 years. Okay.
We're talking here with Fiona Hayes and Gerry Thornley. Our rugby coverage is with thanks to Vodafone, sponsors of the Irish rugby team of us, everyone in. Fiona, Munster. So Ospreys 18, Munster 10. Ospreys minus their internationals effectively because of this Welsh-New Zealand game, which is outside an official test window. We spoke with you and Keith, I think, after the Connacht game, and even though Munster had won that, you just weren't too impressed with what you've seen from Munster across these opening games in the United Rugby Championship. And then this was just very poor. Like, there's no two ways around it. I don't know, with Munster, it's hard to feel like there's a real identity there or a sense of what they're trying to do, and it's a couple of steps forward, I guess, against Scarlets, who then turn out to be pretty poor themselves, let's be honest, and then several steps back. And as they sign off for November, that coaching ticket, you couldn't really say that they'll be sitting around saying, right, we've really shown everyone what we're about this year.
No, I don't think so. I think that was probably the sloppiest performance so far. It was very error-strewn. I think they had maybe 14 turnovers to the Ospreys 5. Just the set piece, I was extremely disappointed myself with the scrum. I thought Nicky Smith was all over John Ryan. The referees it was almost like we didn't know how to cope with that. They didn't change anything. That's what I didn't understand. They were losing scrum after scrum, and whatever Holly Davidson was giving it against, they didn't seem to fix it. And it was the same when Keenan Knox came on. So it was like they wanted to get back home. Looking at it, it was the errors. Jack O'Donoghue, who I've been praising all season, probably wasn't his best game either. Peter O'Mahony wasn't up to much. I mean, there wasn't very many changes. There was still a strong second row, Klein, Wycherley, but that pack didn't seem to get around the place. And it was, I suppose, the only light for me out of it was I thought Jack Crowley actually had a good game. Maybe not high level game, but he tried things. I thought he had a couple of 50-22s that went really well. And he added a bit of excitement when he got on the ball. albeit sometimes he kicked the ball away when he shouldn't have. But I was excited watching him at times. Probably the only thing that was exciting about the game for me.
Yeah, it was pretty miserable. By the way, that 50-22, Gerry, should really suit Munster because they are fairly lethal. I mean, if they have a line out in your 22, it can spell bad news. They should be pretty enthused about that rule change.
Yeah, I'd say Ron O'Gara would have loved it, wouldn't he? Done with it. Yeah, it's an interesting new law. I don't think it's been as revolutionary as perhaps people might have expected, but it's another skill set, isn't it? It's another skill that you can add to the game that gets due reward, and it maybe will keep back three defenders that little bit more honest. There aren't that many openings for it, though. Teams are cute enough about it. Yeah. The team was Shane Delahunt catching an overthrow in his first touch for Connacht against Munster and spiraling a ball from inside his own half.
Yeah.
Skews away from Andrew Conway just inside the 22, and he gets a 50-22 and he punches and then unfortunately has a crooked throw. I don't think we'll ever get a hooker in a game like that ever again. But yeah, it's I agree with everything that Fiona says about that Munster performance. It was just a dreadful game of rugby. Like, Ospreys didn't do much. This ran a little bit harder into contact and, won the penalty count 14-9 as well as the turnover count, and hey presto, won the game 18-10. But like, even in the first 4 games when Munster were winning, so much of it was dependent upon their line-out drive and close-range tap penalties. I think that line-out maul try they got in the second half last week, that was their 12th of 20 tries that came directly from a line-out maul or a tap penalty. And when they had one correctly overruled in the first half and they missed another 5-metre throw, lost the ball, when you take that away, when they don't convert those chances, they suddenly look blunt. If they converted those into both 7-pointers, they'd have won comfy enough, and everybody would have said it was another classic Munster performance. But they didn't convert those chances. They had the territorial chances in the first half to build a lead. They didn't do so, and then just like they didn't seem to know where else to go. It's I described them the last time I was on this show as an enigma to me. I think about them a lot. I can't work them out. Their best performance by a distance was with supposedly their weakest team on paper away to the Scarlets, who admittedly were barring average that day. Like when you saw Jack O'Sullivan carving through early on with just an out-in line, one off and scoring under the posts. But they scored some lovely tries that day. It seemed like they were able to play what they saw in front of them. You think of Ben Healy's long skip pass to Calvin Nash and the try in the corner. And yet I'd say that was probably the least coached side of them all. You know what I mean? It was the least settled side of them all, which makes you wonder almost is more, maybe less is more, because yeah, they're very dependent on their line-up maul, and there's a lack of creativity which you have to be concerned for. Yeah.
Before we wrap up, just to mention that Adam Griggs has named 33-woman squad, obviously, for the November doubleheader. Friday 12th of November, Fiona, it's USA, then Japan 8 days later. So I see Chloe Pearce is back after doing very well in the Interpros, and then 6 uncapped players, 2 from Leinster, Mary Healy, Ella Roberts, Munster, Maeve Og O'Leary and Alana McInerney, and then Grace Brown-Moran and Shannon Toohey of Connacht. The, I guess, not ideal dynamic here is that these are Adam Griggs' final 2 matches, and everybody knows that and he knows that, so that's just a strange one. And then your reaction to Greg McWilliams coming in. Ultimately, he was assistant coach when Ireland won the Grand Slam back in 13 and World Cup semi-finalist in 14, so just that change, I suppose, in the Irish team. Interested to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, look, I'm really excited about it. I think obviously Greg has coached me in the past, so I know exactly what he brings. And for me, his level of detail is quite excellent. He's very big on skills and focusing on minute details around that skills. And I think sometimes that's what I lacked when we were watching the girls. I knew the ability was there. I just catch pass seemed to go out the window when we were in those qualifiers under pressure at least. And I think Greg will bring a system there. We're constantly working on skills, but he'll also have a game plan. I mean, he's gone over to America since. He's done really, really well over in Yale. He's worked with the Americans men team, and he loves the game. He loves the women's game. I was with Ballincollig at the weekend, and he was down watching, and it was great seeing Irish coaching up, coming watching the women's game, and that it was exciting for a couple of my girls on the sideline. They were like, "Oh, is that Greg McWilliams?" So he loves the game. He has the want, he's the desire, but he also is an excellent coach. So it's really exciting times. Okay,
2 thumbs up there, Gerry.
Absolutely, yeah. Greg's got history with them. He's very well regarded. I think it's a perfect appointment for him. In a sense, too, he's coming from a little bit of a it's not the worst when you come from a low base. If you're a new coach coming in, you know, the only way is up, you would have thought. And I'd be surprised if there isn't significant improvements under him. But yeah, because it's been a difficult time for the women's game in this country, missing out on World Cup qualification. You see what a lift it gives a sport when you see the Irish women's team make the Hockey World Cup and the Republic of Ireland football team doing the same. It's real shop window stuff for the sport.
Yeah, it sure is. So hopefully onwards and upwards now. Gerry Thornley of the Irish Times, Fiona Hayes, Irish international, former Irish international. Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Cheers, Joe.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.